completely agree with all those. And we're gonna, oh, that was loud.
Sorry about that.
Just in case we weren't sure, we are going to answer those questions as we go through. So this is an ongoing, this is just, have we captured every type of benefit that you guys are interested in? And again, we asked the community this, obviously, as residents, but the development community as well. Are there benefits that you guys would like to see? You can add those in as well as we go through this. A lot of times it's more the community's asking for benefit and the development community is reacting to that, but there could be benefits that you guys need as well. So I'm going to go ahead and go back to our presentation again. Hopefully. There we go. And so the other thing that we really asked you guys about is, where can we improve and what types of things should we look at? And so here's, again, a summary. We have it in 2 slides. One thing we heard over and over again during the workshop was early and frequent communication. This is communication on information that the city has, as well as between the residents and developers themselves. We needed more education to help residents access and navigate the community benefit process and identify partners to achieve these. Guidance for the different types of community benefits to ask for based on the scale of projects. Again, this is going to be, what can you ask for if it's a smaller site plan versus a larger initiative? And I see a hand. Gretchen, if we can get the microphone over, I think it's. I need you to speak into the microphone so we can all hear you, sir.
I just had one comment about the previous. I saw where you had local source hiring opportunities. And I'd like to kind of augment that to say primary source, because a lot of times development happens, but it doesn't allow for opportunities by persons within that immediate area. So local hiring as well as primary source hiring opportunities.
Okay, thank you for adding that clarification. All right, down here, it's kind of covered, sorry about that, but better reporting on benefits included in the built projects. So these are the development projects. So what are they actually providing in terms of benefit? That was something that came out of our task force too, the workshop. We heard quite a few people say that developments are providing benefits, but maybe they're not communicated clearly so that the residents know what benefits are coming with the development as well. Continued, so better coordination of various projects occurring within the community area, specifically between city, county, and CMS. So this was something we heard a lot in the afternoon, was maybe the county is having a park project and there's a development in the area. There might be a road project or another capital project. How are we coordinating to make sure everyone's talking to each other and that we're supporting the projects in the area instead of maybe creating conflicts? And the last one we have here, continuous community outreach and education to help build capacity for Charlotteans to participate in developing or communicating about the benefits to their community within a project. Essentially what that means is capacity for the communities. How do we help you guys increase your capacity and your involvement in these processes? So that is what we heard. We can jump back to Jamboard at this point. If you guys have anything else that you would like to add, any types of improvements, again, that you've thought about on either side, the development side and the resident side, or anything else in terms of enhancements that we could give to our processes or things to look into, we'd really appreciate that feedback as well.
That's correct. Yes.
Yes.
Slide 3. And you can, again, just use a sticky to add your notes. So on the left-hand side, it's the 4th icon from the top.
The previous two slides where we talked about the improvements that we heard that needed to be made, are there any other improvements that we didn't capture in those last two slides that you would also like us? I can't put them back on the screen, but I'll go over them again. So one of it is early and frequent communication, educational resources to help residents access and navigate the community benefit process and identify their development partners. Guidance for the different types of community benefits and which ones to ask for in terms of the size of development that's coming in. Better reporting on the benefits that are actually included already within the development projects. Better coordination of various projects occurring within a community area with the different government authority departments as well. And then continuous community outreach and education to help build capacity for the neighborhood groups. Now that's a summary. We do have obviously a lot more detail within those. We have a lot of detail, just so everyone's clear, but we have summarized those. So we're starting to see some pop up. One is enforcement of agreed to community benefits. Yes, we hear that one a lot. Need to define what community benefits are part of the new UDO on a base case or as a bonus. Yes, and we'll talk about that in one of our follow-up sections. But we have earmarked that. So how are CMS and county part of the project, or process rather, sorry. A certain and timely permitting process for business owners, property owners, and/or developers. And we heard that a lot too, more consistency. So it's not a, I have some land and a project, let's see what's going to happen. This is a very good point. It seems like the basic premise is that the development itself is not a community benefit. If so, that is a miss in the narrative. And so that is a good point that we can talk about, that development happening is a positive thing in a lot of cases. I think what we end up with in this conversation is end up talking about the impacts and externalities to the existing residents. And so we forget the fact that that benefit in the development itself, either with more neighbors and more houses, more businesses that can service people in the neighborhood. Proportional expectations, absolutely. Scoring metrics for measurable understanding of the benefits themselves. Someone put, still not sure what a community benefit process actually consists of. Well, hopefully we will answer that in the next 2 hours. All right. Is there anything I missed reading out? Better communication with the community on the next steps and how they can engage. Thank you. Community benefit groups. Skilled mediators to help through the process. Yes, we have thought about that as well. And city-specific program departments to manage small-scale parks or public spaces. All right, we do have at least one question, I believe.
So we have, just going to read through this. This might be a little bit of a longer one. Okay. So Leanne posted, for the person who wrote scoring metrics for measurable understanding of benefits, can you help clarify what you mean by scoring metrics?
You should feel special and like a celebrity with your
Yeah,
fancy
right,
microphone.
exactly. Got a voice for radio at least. So I have, with all of the different benefits that we're discussing here, I think there's always been a misunderstanding of what the development community may be providing the community and the public. So if there's somehow to clearly lay out all of the benefits that have been identified within a development and then provide a scoring of that back to the community. So it's a little more black and white, how much a development is providing back to the community that may be beneficial.
Okay. Thank you.
Robin, I think we may have a couple of additional stickies. They
Okay.
are on the right-hand side. My cursor is on one, and then this one was added as well.
Okay, so compliance process to ensure agreed upon benefit deliverables are attained. And then a need for more resources at the city to help navigate all of the processes. As a city employee, I concur. But we will talk about all of these as we talk about our next steps. So these are great. At that point, we will go ahead and take a break. It looks like we're over time by about 10 minutes. We are going to take a little bit of a break. Let's reconvene at 2:05. Allow people in the room to get up and walk around. And if you are on Zoom, you can log out and log back in if you need to, put us on mute and hide your camera, do what you need to do. But 2:05 will reconvene. Thank you.
on grilled items for one piece of equipment, you must use food mill.
All right, guys, we're gonna get everybody in the room to sit back down and pay attention here in a minute. Get started again. All right, so we're gonna get started now on what can be done now. And this is really, again, an overview of toolbox items that we've pulled together based on what we have now. So I'm gonna turn it over to Leanne King. She's gonna walk us through our next couple slides.
Great. Thanks, Robin. So as Robin just mentioned, this toolbox is really intended to help residents in particular and community organizations know how to engage in the various processes that are happening within the city to achieve community benefits. And so one part of this toolbox that we think is important to include are some steps about how to get engaged, get informed, and some specific things to do to kind of be up to speed and know how and when to be involved. So the first step that's listed here is for neighborhood or community area organizations to get organized and informed. We know that many of you in the room there in Charlotte and on the Zoom call here are representatives of community organizations, and that's wonderful that you're already established. Obviously, your organizations play a lot of different important roles, but we do know that there are parts of the community that don't have established organizations that represent them from a neighborhood standpoint or a community area standpoint. And so we think that that's an important first step for fostering effective communications about community benefits in an organized way. We think that it's also important for community organizations to be representing the interests of an area, that there's going to be a much stronger impact coming from an organizational standpoint than individuals acting alone. So the intent is that the toolbox is going to provide some tools and reference and resource materials for organizations that are, or neighborhoods that are wanting to form organizations to better represent themselves during these processes. Step 2 is focusing on developers starting the conversation by sharing information about potential development projects. If there's one thing I think that we've heard loud and clear through this process, it's that conversations really need to start as early as possible to make sure that they're going to be achievable. One of the recommendations here is really to foster those effective communications about community benefits with the community as early as possible within the development process. And one of the most important aspects of that is early learning for the developer about the history of the area and valuable assets that from a community standpoint that already exist in the area. We think that could be really helpful and provide a lot of benefits, even beyond developing community benefits within the community. So step 3 is initiating a dialogue between partners early in discussions about community benefits. So we've talked about neighborhood and community area organizations and developers, but there are other partners that it's important to engage with. There are nonprofit organizations, other community groups, the city of Charlotte, that all need to be involved depending on the scale of the development. We've talked about a site-specific community area or citywide development. If we're looking at a larger community benefit that's a larger citywide project, there's likely going to be many partners involved. And so it's important to identify early on who those partners might be and start them involved in discussions. The next step is really to keep up to date on development activity in your area and engage in development projects, particularly rezoning cases. The Charlotte Explorer tool is one thing that we want to make sure people know is available to them. There's also some recommendations we'll talk about later today with regard to how that tool could be improved. But that's a way for people to stay engaged and up to date on different development activity in their area. There are also some other resource tools, the Community Planning Academy and the ULI included in their recent TAP report, Urban Plan, which is a youth program that are both kind of focused on educating people about the land use process and advocating for community interests. With respect to kind of staying up to date on rezonings that are happening within the area, we think that that's a really important way for community organizations to be engaged in the community benefits process. And we also have some recommendations later we'll share with you about improving notification and awareness about rezoning opportunities. And then the final step here is to participate in future planning initiatives citywide and within your geographic area. So there is a lot of planning work going on in the city right now. Everyone's probably fairly familiar with the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan that was adopted earlier this year and it's been ongoing the last few years. There are other planning efforts underway that are more focused planning efforts, such as the corridors of opportunity, the transit station area plans, the strategic mobility plan, and in the future, we'll have community area plans that will be developed coming off of the 2040 comprehensive plan. So it's really important to plug into those planning initiatives. One of the main reasons is that those plans are important opportunities for identifying, assessing, and documenting the specific community benefits that neighborhoods and community area organizations want to achieve in their area. So that is a really important part of this process because identifying them and documenting them will open up a lot of doors with respect to having conversations with various partners about getting those benefits achieved. And Robin, I'll hand it back over to you.
Thank you, Leanne. So again, those are steps for how residents can support community benefits. Wanted to put this up here. We did go through, and we have a couple slides after this, talking about how the current development processes achieve certain benefits that we heard from the workshop. And so definitely want to make sure that part of this is an education piece. We've gone through, we do have an existing process, the rezoning process, where some community benefits can be negotiated. We also have our development permitting process where some things are required already or incentivized in our existing code. And we know that that's not enough. I will say that. We are adding this stuff also into our action plan and talking about how we can tweak some of these processes to make it more friendly for both sides, the developers and the residents as well. But definitely wanted to point that out. Also, we have the community planning initiatives, capital investment programs, and at the bottom, even though it's hard to see, the public-private partnerships. These are things where the city gets involved and can make sure some community benefit outcomes from those processes as well. Now, they aren't as comprehensive enough, and we have heard that loud and clear from the task force workshop at the end of September. And so again, you will see some of these things in the action plan, but we would be remiss if we didn't point out that these are tools that we currently have, and we can continue to look on how to expand it.
Robin, we have one question in the chat.
Sure, go ahead.
It's from John Porter, and he's asking, how does CBP Square Planning's goal to reduce the number of conditional zonings by use of comp plan and UDO? Does this supplant the small area plan idea, which to me seems more comprehensive and long-looking?
So I'm going to attempt to answer that. I think there was quite a few things packed in there. The small area plans, we're going to call them community area planning, community area plans. That's going to get started after place types and kind of our larger citywide initiatives are completed with the comp plan. What we have or what we will put in there is similar to what were in the small area plans in the past, and they will have project lists for programs. It is similar to what is currently in our playbooks that we have for corridors of opportunity, and similar to the lists that are in the station area plans and other plans that we have throughout the city. And so the hope is by ensuring that we have a lot of these projects and programs listed out with community involvement through the planning process, that some of the other initiatives we have at the city, we can pull directly from that. We know this area has this need because it's in a plan that was adopted. And so developer can pull it out. Economic development may be able to use that list to look for community benefits as well in different departments and organizations, nonprofits, whatnot. And so really there's going to be a lot of focus on getting those lists correct. In terms of the rezoning that we heard, I believe, and someone else on the planning staff can hop in and help me with this one because this isn't my bailiwick. But a lot of it will be some of the smaller rezonings are just getting tweaked in their zoning at the moment. And so those conditional rezoning plans would be able to be converted to more of a conventional style. I don't think that it's going to change the way we do everything, but I could be wrong again. So I don't know if anyone else on planning wants to help me answer that or get into more detail.
I'm sure there are some situations where the conditions are similar to current standards that can be converted over, but there are also conditional plans that just have nuances that really won't, they'll just remain as is, so.
Okay. Give us a second to get you a microphone. I know this is weird, but on Zoom, we don't have one microphone that picks everybody up without speaking into them.
Yeah, just a few others. I mean, the county really controls a lot of the community benefits we've discussed. So they have a bond program that they run for Parks and Rec in schools and is a large part of their budget. So it's more than just the city's CIP program. And then when the TOD ordinance was adopted, there was a effort that was gone through to determine community benefits as part of a bonus program.
Mm-hmm.
That is, I guess you could say development permitting, but it was a more defined process about community benefits for more density or height.
Exactly. So those are two really good examples. We'll definitely add the county in here. We do talk later on about coordinating better with the county, but that TOD is a great example.
Real quick, I'm hearing a lot from neighbors, community leaders that with the 2040 plan, there's not going to be as many rezonings because you're going to have pretty much things. And the community benefit, if I as a neighbor, neighborhood leader, and we have something that gets built by right, legal by right, now by the place types in the 2040, how are we going to be heard on our, because there's no rezoning and the developer doesn't have to come to the community if it's by right legal and it's under the new 2040 plan. So where are we going to get the community benefit that we can say, hey, let's sit down and can you maybe do this, or that'll be more favorable to the neighborhood too, that it's a win-win situation for all of us.
Mm-hmm.
So that's what I'm hearing, a lot of distrust out in the community.
Okay. I completely understand that. And we'll talk about that a little bit more when we get into our action plan items, because we are addressing that. What I can say specifically is there are going to be a couple different things that we can do to achieve that. So first, what I want to go over, we had our staff members who worked on the UDO and the ones that implement the current ordinance go through the community benefit list, that overall list we talked about earlier, and let us know what is currently being captured and what isn't. And so this is more of a, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And I'm trying to move this so we can all see it. Not working, but different things like affordable housing is incentivized in our current zoning ordinance, rental and ownership, development project design and uses. Some of that's required in our current zoning ordinance and some of it's incentivized. It's also going to be in, or is in, the draft UDO that's out for comment. Affordability is incentivized in the draft UDO that is out now. Electric charging stations, I thought this was a great example. So it's incentivized in our current zoning ordinance and it will be required in some way, shape, or form in the draft UDO. Environmental protection, we have that currently. We incentivize it a little bit more and then we are adding it or making sure it's consistent in the draft UDO. Fencing and visual barriers, again, it's required in some cases currently. It's incentivized in others. And it looks like it is part of the new UDO under standards. So we have that in there. And again, this isn't a catch-all, a catch-all list of everything you guys want, but we did want to say some of these things will be required by right anyway. So fire and police facilities, So, it's not going to be required that they build a new fire station, but land reservation is in there. Open space preservation, we currently do that, and it's going to continue in what we have in the draft UDO. Parks, so parks are incentivized currently, and it will be required in the draft UDO. It means the land is reserved for it, but you don't actually have to build the fire station. I will say, let me preface this, I didn't write the draft UDO, so I don't know all of the different nuances. The UDO team, no, I wouldn't say that. Nope. Let me go through this list. If we have specific questions, I'm not the one to answer them, but I will write them down. Parking is currently required and is also in the UDO, and we have a preservation of buildings that is incentivized currently. It will be required in the historic districts. Road connectivity is required now, and it will continue to be required. Road improvements, again, certain ones are required now. We also have that in the draft UDO. Schools, currently land can be reserved and it's further incentivized. And there is land reserved, a land reserve in their UDO that's currently out now. Sidewalks are required now. They're incentivized to get more sidewalks. And we have someone from CDOT here if we have specific questions, but in the draft UDO, again, sidewalks will be required on site. Signage is currently required in certain cases. We have stormwater management and resiliency. So there is stuff that addresses that in the draft UDO. And let's see our last measures here. Traffic calming and mitigation. That's a catch-all that we put in our benefits list. There were a lot of specific things that were mentioned in the workshop that kind of fall under traffic calming and mitigation. And so there is a section in the UDO that refers to a lot of the CDOT regulatory standards that include a traffic calming and mitigation as well. Trails and greenways, again, we have a land reservation currently in our zoning ordinance. It will be incentivized as well. And we have it required in our UDO draft. Same thing with transit stops and tree preservation. Yeah, this is all going to be put online after we're done today. I think it should be within a week. It'll be up there and we can send you guys the link with everything. I want to go over some other current resources that we currently have. And so this is a list of, we have Charlotte Explorer. Again, with everything else, we know that this isn't, we've heard a lot of things about Charlotte Explorer is great, but we need to add more information there. So there is items in the action plan that further address expanding some of these. But let me go over these real quick, Nate, and then I'll get your question. We have a link up here to the current zoning ordinance and the UDO, the draft that is out now. We have corridor of opportunity playbooks. Some corridors of opportunity have playbooks that are completed and we're continuing to work on those. Those playbooks will have a list of projects that people can pull from. Station area plans the same way. CDOT is working on the strategic mobility plan, which is their framework for how they're going to invest capital dollars in transportation infrastructure. The city has a planning academy that we're working on updating and getting that out so that residents can come join us at the planning academy and learn more detail, more of the guts of planning. We have the ULI TAP, community engagement in the development process. That information is online. There's an urban plan that's also with Charlotte ULI. That's more, it's similar to the Planning Academy, but that's geared toward high school and college students. And then we also have, even though it's covered on the screen, the Charlotte Future 2040 Comprehensive Plan link. Again, these are the tools that we know exist today. We know that some of them aren't perfect, and we're going to look at expanding some of those as well. Nate, you had a question.
Yeah, I thought the summary was very good, and I know it's hard to get granular, but there's a lot of things in the UDO that overlap with the goals that we described at the beginning, that all the sidewalks are wider than the current zoning ordinances. There's more bike lanes required. Open space is increased. there's more tree preservation. I mean, when you do a direct comparison of requirements, yes, it was required previously and it's required now,
Mhm.
but the requirements are increased from where they are today. And so,
Yeah, that's a really good point, is that we're taking what we have now and expanding upon it.
yes,
in the
and
UDO.
so it's a little, again, if our goals are being addressed because they're already being increased in the base ordinance, I think we need to find a way where the community benefit agreements we're not getting to a solution that's already baked into what
Mhm.
is being considered.
Agreed. And that's why we wanted to go over that a little bit here. Again, I don't have all the details and the UDO is in draft form. What we can do is make sure that we can let you know what section these are in. Please look at them. I think, is the commenting open on the UDO still? Yes, so you guys can add comments, again, support if you have questions, things like that. If you have questions, feel free to let us know today. Again, I am not the person to answer those questions, but I will make sure those questions get to the people that can do it. Tim.
Thank you. I just want to mention again, jumping on to Nate's point, one of the stated goals, one of the primary stated goals of the city council is housing affordability.
Mhm.
That's a concern I'm sure all of us in this room share. When you factor in the UDO, the wider sidewalks, the bike lanes, the more enhanced tree preservation, the heritage trees, the stormwater regulations, all of those things by themselves all sound wonderful. When you layer upon layer upon layer, the net result is a dramatic negative impact on housing affordability. So I just want to repeat that concern. On the one hand, we're talking a good game about housing affordability. I don't see that in action in this UDO.
Okay. I think the one thing that I can say to that is, in order to get the benefits that we want to see, as well as having the housing affordability, it is going to take multiple tools, programs, things like that, that we're going to have to look into to really accomplish that. But to your point, yes, if we add this stuff in our regulations, it tends to drive up the cost of actually developing it. So we do hear that.
Robin, we have one hand raised on Zoom
Sure,
from
go ahead.
Rachel Krenz. We can ask her to unmute and ask your question.
Hey there, I just wanted to note, I know someone mentioned about the, with rezonings are going to reduce and how the communities get involved to get these benefits. And so in light of the conversation that we're having right now about what benefits we are getting out of the UDO or could get out of the UDO, it's almost a little unfortunate. It's not too late, but if this conversation was happening before the first draft, then we could sort of, all the things that you want to see in a CBA could be discussed for the UDO, but we have this great opportunity where it's happening at the same time also. And so I just wanted to encourage folks to get involved in the UDO because all of these benefits we're talking about, it would be really nice if they were baked into the code already so that neighborhoods didn't have to ask for it and developers didn't have to be surprised by it. So I think the chart that you did, Robin, and Nate's point about, the details of it are really an important one. So I just wanted to thank you for highlighting that because some of these community benefits are already happening or are about to be added, and we should help shape that so we don't have to be doing a ton more work on each specific neighborhood, each specific site.
Absolutely, Rachel. Thank you for that. And I think that speaks to then the concerns of the residents that are nervous about conditional rezonings potentially going down, is that if it's in the by right process, it will be accounted for. All right, I have one last slide to go over. I just wanted to mention this as well. This isn't a traditional tool that you guys can go use, but we do have 2 council-created commissions that are looking at similar things. Again, they have very focused visions. It's not the same exact thing that we're talking about, but we do have the Neighborhood Equity and Stabilization Commission and the Equitable Development Commission. And so NEST is going to be looking at anti-displacement strategies. Equitable development is going to look at ways to address that infrastructure needs throughout the city are equitable. And again, just wanted to highlight those 2 in particular because that addresses some of the same issues that we've heard through the workshop. In addition, What we are doing with the implementation of the comp plan is we have the planning committee and we also will have a staff implementation committee as well that's going to look at how we can implement some of the policies of the comp plan. And so again, some of these things are related. And so just wanted to add extra clarity that we will have probably double look on some of these items as well. I believe Ness and the Equitable Development Commission Council did approve the membership already. I don't think they have met yet unless someone can correct me. Okay. And then the implementation committee, we're currently working on developing who the staff members are that are going to be on the staff portion of that. But again, the planning committee is the public facing version of that, and they are already on there. Now, to make up for the fact that we went extra long in the first section, apparently I got through this really quick now, but we have time now for extra comments or questions. If anyone has anything that they would like to add, again, that we can talk about or things that we can look into, different tools that you guys know that exist that we can look into adding, now would be a good time to share that and we can have some good conversation. Let us get you a microphone so everyone can hear you. Okay. I don't know if we can do that, but I'll try to get them as soon as possible. The question, just so if anyone didn't hear it, was if you guys can get the slideshow that we're presenting today as soon as possible after the meeting. We have some case studies that we're going to go over a little bit that we've looked from other communities. That's in that action plan section. And we're going to continue to expand on that.
Yeah, there was a comment made earlier, and I don't know if it falls within the committees or the city by the young men up there regarding the cost once you start factoring in sidewalks and trees and the improvements that need to happen when you're building in communities.
Mhm.
My question is will there be a community that look into that? Kind of like the assessment to see how can we meet in the middle with developers and CBAs and how we mitigate that cost? Because as a community leader and the activist in my community, I believe that sidewalks is needed. I mean, you cannot just build a community, only build the sidewalks in the community, but then your community run into a major street where
Mhm.
people have to walk on the grass to get to the resources, right?
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's this room or if it's within one of the 3 committees that the city has formed where that deeper conversation would need to be had regarding how do you meet in the middle with all of that.
Thank you for that. I think you hit on a really good point. So part of updating ordinances and regulations that we have is to look at some of those issues and see if we can address it there. The other piece of it, though, if we go back, is also that we have capital investment as well. And so the city needs to look at where they're going to invest, where some of those pieces of infrastructure aren't there and there are gaps. And the city will look at that as well. And so you're having 2 different groups of people, developers as well as the city, looking at what they can invest in that. In terms of kind of the economic and the cost of it, I do believe we have a group that is looking at an economic analysis of what these changes would do within the development community itself. And so once that's completed, we'll have better answers about costs and things like that.
Hey, and
Are there any
Robin,
other- Oh,
sorry,
yes,
it's Rachel again.
that scared me. Oh my gosh.
I'm so sorry. It's weird being virtual. I just wanted to clarify, I'm not sure who said that comment earlier about the affordability, but I think it's a good point that might need more clarification or, explanation on it, because I didn't take that comment to mean no sidewalks. It's just the increase of things that cost. So currently you have to provide a certain width sidewalk, and now it's, more sidewalk, which means you have less area for development. So you get, for example, in multifamily, I'm a multifamily developer. So if I have to provide more sidewalk, that means there's less rentable area for the building, which means the affordability is harder. So I think that it's a really good point that I don't know if now's the time or not, but I don't think that earlier comment was about no sidewalks, but more about what's the impact on increasing the sidewalks or other things.
Thank you for that, Rachel. Yeah, let's get you a microphone. We have John. And again, if you're on Zoom, if you can raise your hand so that we can make sure that no one's talking over each other, that would be great.
To follow on Rachel's comment, that the added cost is one component. Like if you and I call it the numerator is what the project costs. So if you add, $10,000 to that, it certainly hurts affordability. If you take away from the denominator, if you take 100 units and you reduce it to 90 because there's more sidewalks, more trees, a bigger storm detention pond, all benefits that our community needs, the affordability is much more drastically affected. So the yield of the project, like you can get benefits, you can get better sidewalks, you can get more trees, you can get more stormwater, but give me more density. And that also accomplishes the goal of raising the property tax per acre in our community so that we can then pull that up, bond it, and equitably distribute it. Because a developer contributing, and I like not to say developer, I like to say a property owner. Think about if you're a homeowner and you're redeveloping your property, what putting a sidewalk across your front yard would cost you from a grading standpoint, from taking down trees. So think about it from an owner. And that's just a conversation we really need to have, because the true benefits are going to be accomplished by bonding, $100,000 of additional tax revenue generated by a project into a $10 million bond that creates sustainable revenue over time, rather than me chipping in $25,000 or $15,000 here, $10,000 here, delaying my project by 3 months, maybe it impairing the feasibility of the project. So I just like to think about the numerator, think about the denominator, and think about the economic development aspect of bonding the tax revenues. That's where the real benefits, like streets are built, parks are bought and developed by the county and the city, not by an individual homeowner.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
I just wanted to say two things. One, John, that's a good point about the additional tax revenue and bonding. I think we inherently know that, but to really bring that forward, I think is an important part of the conversation, because it is more money that we could apply citywide. I just want to make sure that we do have a separate economic analysis going on of the affordability components of the UDO. And we actually have added on to that will do site design. And so actually have projects laid out according to the new code versus the old code, just to really understand what the buildability would be, as well as have like 3D visualization and things like that. So we are testing all of those things that y'all are raising right here. And so we are doing that. And there is a group looking into that. I just want to make sure we stay on the community benefits and really talking about how those are being applied citywide, and how we can have a toolbox here to help with that meets the needs of the community, as well as is something that the development community can be a part of shaping.
Thank you for that.
Thanks for that, Allison. And I think a number of us have volunteered to be on that committee to help that economic development. I just don't think we can reiterate this topic enough. I was looking forward to this discussion because I thought it was going to be a discussion between the real estate folks and the neighborhood folks, so that we could better understand what each other's positions are and learn from each other, frankly. There are things that I need to know from the neighborhood side. Carol and I have worked together a lot, and I need to know those things in order to make sure the projects we're doing meet the needs of the community better. There are some things we know that you guys could benefit from. So, and one of the things I think high level equity is an important element to all of us. The solution to equity, or certainly one of the largest solutions to equity, is broad economic development. The concern that I had, or the assumption I think here, is that every developer that does a development is getting, obscenely rich off of every development. And that's just not an accurate assumption. Most developments barely meet, return thresholds. There are some exceptions, but they're few and far between. Most developments, just chin the bar you have to meet certain thresholds to attract capital in order to do the deal. If you can't attract the capital, you can't deliver the investment returns, you can't do the project. If you don't do the project, there's a loss to the community for jobs and employment opportunities and so on. And so the concern, I think, overarching through this whole narrative is, sure, it sounds good to preserve more trees. Sure, it sounds good to add bike lanes everywhere and electric charging stations and parks and fire sale. All of that sounds good. But there's a cost to all of those things. And if that cost is so great that it kills deals, then I think the community is harmed as a result of this. So, I've said it before, I'll keep saying it as long as you guys will keep listening. That's the overarching concern. And I'm eager to see the economic development impact of some of the planning principles that we're talking about. Developers in general don't oppose community benefits. We want to hear what the community wants. You guys know more about your specific needs than we do. We want to hear that, but we also need to balance that against, does it make the project inviable financially or not? And so those are the conversations that I think that are important. And the UDO is essentially mandating a wish list of everybody's best desires. And right off the bat, you're starting with a project that may not pencil. So the net result could be, a dramatic reduction in economic development.
Absolutely. And I can appreciate all of that. That's really what we're going to do and look at moving forward. So we'll take a break here in a minute and reconvene at 3. That's when we're going to go over the action plan. And that's where we'll have a lot more of these conversations and have a lot more feedback to let us know what we need to look into a bit more, what kind of examples and what types of tools you guys need to help with that. I think the main one, and Tim, what you shared hits the nail on the head a bit, is we need to make sure that the right people are talking before you guys can really get into your concept planning for a lot of these developments. So you know what the community needs and you can build that in early.
Robin, we have one hand raised from Abdul.
Sure.
If we can ask him to unmute.
Hey, thank you. So, and listening to the past couple of comments, I do understand that it's easier to get more done when you have the ability to raise higher tax revenue and tying that to higher density. Okay, the logic makes sense, right? However, there are communities and areas, and I'm speaking for Steel Creek as a whole, right? I'm with the Steel Creek Residents Association, and we absolutely fight high density developments tooth and nail down here, right? Simply because the infrastructure can't support it. And no matter how much you try to tie these community benefits to the price tag that comes with the higher density or the tax revenue with the higher density, 160 is still not going to get widened until the state says it's going to get widened. We understand that Charlotte can't do anything about that. But the higher the density, the larger the negative impact it has on, we can't move now, right? And then if you add, extra townhome developments or extra apartment complexes, I mean, we're going to be landlocked down. Nobody will be able to move anywhere. So while I understand that higher density makes sense in some places, South End, anything that's closer to uptown, it makes sense. Anything that's on a transit line, it makes sense. But people move out this way to get away from that, and higher density only kills us, right?
Thank you for that. And I think that raises, that kind of timing issue that I think most major cities struggle with, which is when you're growing and you're growing at such a rapid pace, how do you make sure infrastructure keeps up with that pace? And to the property owner side, it can't all be on them all the time. Just like it can't all be on the city all the time to fix the problem, which is why we're here having these conversations. So greatly appreciate that. With that, I'm going to go ahead and say, let's take a break. We'll reconvene at 3 o'clock to talk about the action plan. All right, guys, thanks for coming back. We're getting everybody in the room, hopefully settled and back. We had some good conversations here on the break, so I hope you guys on Zoom are also getting your brain juices going and have some wonderful things to share. This next section, we're going to talk about opportunities that we can create for the future. This is really the action plan portion of what we're looking at. And really, I think the majority of comments that you guys have already shared are going to fit in here. One point I want to make before we go into this is that we have taken what you guys have told us during the workshop and we've come up with some of our own ideas, but we really want you guys to co-create this with us and take ownership of some of this as well. And so do not take anything we're sharing with you as an exhaustive list. We want to hear from you. We want to get your ideas and things to look at. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Leanne King, our consultant. She's going to walk through the next couple slides. And Leanne, if you just want to highlight for me when you want to go to the next slide, and I'll go ahead and move this for you.
Okay, that sounds great. Thanks, Robin. So as Robin mentioned, we're going to be taking a look at some of the components that we've identified for potential inclusion in the Community Benefits Action Plan. Those items were collected from various different sources. You know, the 2040 future, the Future 2040 plan is one place. The outcomes of the ULI TAP and the report that was produced from that are another opportunity that we pulled from, and then the workshop feedback that you all have shared back in September. And then ideas collected along the way, some of them from staff and seeing some opportunities to improve some areas. So we're going to be going through that here in just a moment. There's also going to be an opportunity at the end of that presentation for us to do another Jamboard activity to get your reactions and ideas about additional things you'd like to see included. This is kind of a working draft of the action plan at this point, so we definitely want to get more feedback from you as we move forward. Some of the things that you'll see are still being investigated. So, you know, some of these are lower hanging fruit, easier things to do, maybe require fewer resources. Other things either might require more resources or a particular department or new staff member to do it. Might be a little bit of a heavier lift. And some of these have legal implications as well that will need to be coordinated on. So that's all stuff that we're keeping kind of abreast of and thinking through as we develop this. But that being said, we don't want to limit anyone's ideas here and what can be explored. Ultimately, you know, there might be some big moves that get included in the action plan that have some longer range follow-up steps that might need to take place. Let me see, anything else that I wanted to mention there? I think that, so I think that gets us, we're gonna go through the action plan, the Jamboard, and then after that, Matt Prosser, who's also on our team with EPS, is going to give us an overview of some case studies that they're preparing that other communities throughout the nation, you know, example kind of initiatives and projects that they've been doing to give you a little bit of a flavor for the types of case studies we're gonna be including within this toolbox as well. And that might spur some additional questions and ideas from folks. So we're looking forward to the discussion here. Robin, you can go ahead and move to the next slide. This is the overview. So we're creating a framework for organizing a lot of different types of actions that might be taken place as a result of this effort. And you see the 6 buckets here. We're going to walk through each of these 6 buckets and talk about some of the specific items that have been identified, that different actions that could be taken to advance these objectives of fostering education and networking, expanding engagement for residents and developers, identifying community benefits through future planning initiatives, linking future planning initiatives to capital investment planning, and considering future updates to the Unified Development Ordinance, and exploring new tools. So let's go to jump to the first one, fostering education and networking. So some of the ideas that we've heard about here are providing networking events such as meet virtual lunches or mixers. It's a way to connect with maybe an important community partner to meet people and expand your networks and identify potential partners for future community benefit projects. Speaker series to present information on critical topics that people want to learn more about, particularly residents, such as community benefit agreements, increasing leadership capacity, how to engage in the rezoning process, how to engage in future planning initiatives. There could be a lot of ideas. And we have a question later in the presentation to get some specific feedback from you all on those two items there. Also included in this bucket are some ideas for enhancing the Charlotte Explorer mapping portal. There's some ways that we can improve that, maybe including capital improvement projects as part of what's shared on the portal. Maybe putting together some videos to help viewers understand how to actually use the Charlotte Explorer portal. Developing a community benefits contact list. So we talk a lot about people getting in touch with each other, having conversations, having dialogue. Critical to that is knowing who to contact and how to contact them. And so one idea is that there might be a list that some entity within the city would probably manage that could put neighborhood and community organizations in contact with members of the development community and vice versa. The idea of having a community benefits liaison, this could be someone possibly working for the city that could really assist in serving as a resource and contact for community organizations that want to understand how to jump into this community benefits work. And then finally, enhancing the city's planning academy. There was I believe an idea that came out of the ULI TAP work to include a developer on the team of instructors that serve for the planning academy to educate residents on the development process. So those are the ideas under foster education and networking. We can go to the next slide. And here we've got expanding engagement for residents and developers. So the first idea, and this is another one I believe that came out of the ULI TAP, is having a citywide community engagement policy that all departments would follow. So there's kind of consistent engagement and people know how to navigate that. Assessing and addressing themes from public input provided on the city's website. So that's a great way to collect information about what residents are talking about. And that information could be kind of monitored and themed, and those themes could be shared with different committees and departments and divisions that are working on those topics to kind of spur further action. Hosting annual check-ins with community organizations and developers. So this would be an opportunity for the city to kind of make sure there are connections happening on a regular basis with different partners, and a way to kind of connect and find out where there are additional needs for education or networking or whatever the need may be. Exploring interest for the development community to hire community liaisons. So the idea here is that this could be a potential person that would serve somewhat like a petitioner agent does for rezoning during this rezoning process, and could be hired to assist the developer or landowner with engaging with the local community that they're going to be developing within. Next slide. This one is focusing on identifying community benefits through future planning initiatives. We touched on this earlier. This is a really critical piece, and one that we want to make sure that everybody understands that these future plans that are being developed through the corridors of opportunity, station area plans, the strategic mobility plan, and the community area plans that are going to be generated across the city are a really important place to be identifying the different community benefits that each community area wants to achieve within their locality. And so, it's going to be really important to make sure that folks are engaged in that process and understand how to access it, and that those processes include an opportunity to identify, assess, and inventory those community benefits. Next slide. So building off that, once those community benefits are identified for each area through these various planning initiatives, it's going to be important to link those planning initiatives to capital investment planning. So we talked earlier about the fact that, Development is one way, a development project is one way community benefits are built, but it's not the only way. And another way that they're built is actually through capital investment planning. And so linking those planning initiatives and those inventories of community benefit projects with the CIP process is really critical. Two actions here are looking at ways to prioritize capital investment projects that are listed in future plans. And then the second here is making sure that investment is equitable across the city. And there are two processes right now that are kind of underway, the 2040 Plan Implementation Strategy process, and through the work of the Equitable Development Commission that Robin mentioned earlier. Those are ways that we can make sure that investment planning happening across the city is equitable. Next slide. So this one's an important one, and one that probably is good to just clarify a little bit further. Consider future updates to the Unified Development Ordinance, the UDO. As we've talked about during this meeting, there is a draft UDO that's available right now. We showed you a link earlier. We can put a link in the chat if that's helpful for those that want it, how to access that public review draft that's out there right now. So this is going through kind of the process of getting public vetting, and we'll move through to the public adoption process at some point in the future. What we're talking about here is really beyond that process. Potentially it could be included in this one, but we're really thinking that's most likely going to happen after the UDO is adopted, that there could be some additional improvements made to the UDO, just like plans, ordinances change too, because needs and opportunities for communities are constantly changing. So the UDO is never set in stone. It's always, there's always going to be an opportunity to make adjustments in the future. So some of the ideas here are to improve the rezoning notification process, such as changing the timing of when it happens during the rezoning process and making that earlier, increasing the geographic area to be notified, providing direct communications to community organizations that have an interest in rezoning applications, and some other issues that notification process could be enhanced to better make people aware of that project. Exploring opportunities to increase notification of by right development projects. So it could be notifying adjacent property owners when applications have been submitted, or it could be creating an incentive for a by right project that provides a public meeting for larger scale projects. You know, that's something that we want to be careful about, because obviously there is no enforcement to include a community benefit as part of that project, in addition to what that project might already be doing. So we want to make sure that we're being clear when we look at that specific action about what the intention is. Leveraging the transit-oriented development TOD bonus tool that's in the draft UDO for community benefits. The idea here is, you know, let's see how this TOD bonus tool works in action. And maybe in the future, if it's working well, we might want to consider using that same model for community benefits as a way to incentivize development of those. And then exploring creation of a community benefits inventory report. This might be similar to the comment that was made earlier about the scoring of community benefits as part of a project. The intent here was really to create an inventory or a documentation of the benefits that are included within a specific project that would accompany a rezoning or other type of development project application. Next slide. And then this is our final bucket of tools, 2 slides here. So exploring new tools that we might want to consider. So supporting leadership capacity building efforts for community areas and neighborhoods, specifically areas that do not currently have established organizations that represent those communities. Partnering with Mecklenburg County to prioritize development of community benefits. There's been, I think, several comments made on the call today. The meeting today, as well as at the workshop last September, to this point that we really need to be coordinating closely with the county and CMS on community benefits planning, and that they also have their own funding sources that we need to be recognizing as well. Exploring tools to reduce or freeze property taxes to address displacement challenges. Exploring and providing support for land banking. So if there are some kind of larger land use needs in a community, there might be an opportunity to land bank and hold land until those benefits can be developed. Exploring financial incentives to create community benefits. So there might be ways that, it could be tax related, it could be incentives potentially within UDO or others that might create community benefits. And then consider providing legal support to aid in negotiations between developers and residents. I think we've got one more slide here, tools, yeah. Investigate development of a gap funding program for affordable commercial spaces. Exploring providing support to local affordable housing land trusts that build and maintain affordable housing, and then exploring providing tax increment grants for projects that provide certain community benefits identified in community area plans. So again, tying back to those future area plans that are going to be really important for documenting and inventorying the community benefits different areas want. So those are the items that we have got currently in the draft action plan, and we want to hear from you on any questions that you have in relation to these or any other ideas that you might want to share with us. And so I think, are we moving over now, Robin, to Jamboard to get those inputs?
We'll move over in just a second. One thing I wanted to add, because I saw some looks on faces when we talked about a UDO update, even though we haven't even adopted the ones that we have out now. So I just want to put, the reason we put that in there is because, yes, we're working through a draft UDO right now, but that doesn't mean that if we don't get something in this iteration, just because of timing, that's automatically off the table and we won't investigate that again. So we put that in there just to say, we do know we have ordinances. It is one of our tools that we use. And so some of these things, I think we can all agree, are going to take more than a year or two to figure out. And so we're leaving it on the table to say, at some point, it may be something that we need to look into. Maybe it streamlines something in the draft UDO that we're putting out now. Maybe we're adding something new. Maybe we're just trying to figure out a different way to work it. So it's not that we already have a list of things that we're going to change immediately. It's more just keeping it out there on the table to say, we're not going to say no, but there are some larger issues that we're not going to be able to address now for the drafts that we have out, but it doesn't mean that we won't investigate it later. So I just wanted to make that point. At this point, we are going to, do we have a question?
We do. We have something in the chat from John Morris. You ready for it?
Sure.
It
As
says,
he's watching me.
Leanne.
Yes, shoot.
Leanne, add a pay in lieu program similar to the tree mitigation and affordable housing tools for parks, road, bike, sidewalk, and other community benefits would create a flexible means to accomplish much greater projects.
Okay, so that, you're always jumping ahead, John. What we're gonna do next, we're gonna go on to Jamboard. I have 3 questions where we're gonna split up kind of your ideas and put them in buckets so that we have a policy and regulatory bucket we're gonna ask about first. Then we're gonna ask about different types of programs that you guys have ideas on, and then anything about a specific project. And so absolutely right, and we want to collect that information. We're going to jump over to Jamboard now. Gretchen's going to take us over, and we'll continue to add thoughts of new tools. The other thing I want to mention too, there are other options and things we're looking at internally to add into this toolbox to tackle some of our bigger issues, like the food desert issue. That's not something that we had enough information and interagency conversations about to bring you something today. But we are still investigating that, and we hope to add that into the action plan in the future.
And I was just going to add,
when I say something.
Robin, I was just going to add, I know we just went over a lot in terms of the different types of actions. And so I'm going to drop into the chat for those that can see it, the couple of slides that are in here just as a way to get another quick glance at this.
Thank you. All right, I'll give you guys a couple minutes to think and add this in. Again, this first one is going to be what ideas do you have for policy or regulatory items that we can look into for our action plan. Like a new thing in the UDO is regulatory. That's your favorite thing, John. Any type of policy that you would see in a plan, any type of regulation, the development, or even the city could be held to at that point.
And if,
Yeah, there's a
Yep.
lot. I can't actually do it and have it be functional. I'll put it that way.
the chat, yeah.
What ideas do you have for additional policy and or regulations that would help us achieve, or things that we should look into?
And if you
And you know,
can,
I'm looking at the property owners here. If there are anything, you know, this could be city policy, city regulations, things as well, things that could aid you guys in doing certain things. Not all about just what we're gonna put on the developer.
just so we're on the same page, we're on frame number 4 in Jamboard.
See if I can make this bigger so you guys can see it. I can't put it all up there, Nate, sorry. Understood. I'll give you guys a few more minutes and then I'll start discussing some of the options we have here.
Getting some good comments.
We also have a doodler. You guys are doing a great job. I will laugh. I shared this with the group. CMS used Jamboard for some elementary tests and it was interesting. So I'm glad now that we know how to use the sticky note function. I am now a pro at the sticky notes. Whoever did the doodles, you have to erase them. They won't just go away. Everybody, it is Tim. Tim is the doodler. You guys are having too much fun. So I'm going to go ahead and start reading some of these off. So we're starting to get some pretty comprehensive comments. So incentivize community benefits in lieu of base UDO requirements. And that way we can align them more specifically with the community's needs. A digital repository for community benefit groups and the community to exchange resources, best practices, etc. Create policies that align with Mecklenburg County, how community benefits are worked into parks and rec, master planning and funding. Absolutely. There's some movement and I'm getting dizzy. So I'm going to go down to the next line. Eliminate volumes 2 and 3 of the 2040 plan due to their redundancy. That would maybe get rid of part of my job. So I'm a little sensitive to that.
Plenty to do.
Expedited permitting program that is based on Mecklenburg County's pay for the time express review instead of the 30,000 fixed fee program currently in place. Using overlay districts to define areas for community benefits. move the date for approval of the first drafts out for approval at least an extra 2 months for more public input and understanding. Is that for the UDO? Whoever wrote that? Okay, yeah, that's for the UDO draft. Be open to by right innovative design standards and overlays for future concepts we may not be thinking about today. I think that's great. Get NCDOT and Norfolk Southern to hear community and developers. Thank you, someone, for making me say that out loud. Incentivize the use of by right zoning with various community benefits provided. This could serve all groups well and less conditions and more community benefits. I think that's an overall goal that we're going to try and look at. And because affordable housing is a community benefit in and of itself, residential developments with a minimum amount of affordable units would be exempt from contributing to community-wide community benefits.
Robin, we also have one in the chat from Vernetta, and it's
Okay.
Expand outreach methods to inform impacted communities of development prior to approval by the city.
Okay, now Vernetta, I'm going to ask a follow-up question. And is that in terms of by right development? So development that can happen without a rezoning, or are you talking about specifically during a rezoning process?
All. So even if it's by right, the
Okay.
community needs to know how they're going to be impacted because there could be some additional pressure on the city to address the infrastructure. And while I have my mic off, let me also say I accidentally sent another chat to someone privately. So I can't
Okay.
remember who I sent it to by accident.
There. If you get something from Vernetta, just make sure, respond back. Thank you, Vernetta, appreciate it.
Uh-huh.
We also have an additional one here, assess density growth to infrastructure needs, have a 2 to 3 year post-construction plan to address infrastructure impacts.
That was me. Okay, good.
Okay,
Yeah, I just grabbed a couple from the chat and put them in here.
okay, that was you, Leanne. All right, thank you. All right, do we want to talk about any of these? Okay,
There-
silence.
There was one other, I don't know if you can see it, but the one I'm expanding right now, that was an additional one that was in the chat.
Okay, that's the one I think we just read out loud. From
Yeah.
Vernetta, so
Okay.
thank you.
Great.
Nate, you had your hand raised?
Yeah, on the infrastructure needs, I think that's a great comment. I'm just wondering how the other city departments are using everything we're talking about here moving forward. For example, Charlotte Water doesn't look at your all's area plans and projects future growth. They do it a completely different way. And so is everything we're talking about still a planning effort, and what other city departments are involved with infrastructure planning?
So the way I can best respond to that is right now, this process that we're in is led by planning. We are communicating. We have an internal working group with a bunch of different agencies on there. The implementation subcommittee that we're creating to talk about implementing the comp plan is going to have representation from all the departments. And so they will be involved in some of these conversations. So the goal here for this, we do want to hear citywide application, not just for planning initiatives, things that will affect other departments, because we can capture that and talk about that internally.
Robin, Matt Prosser has his hand up.
All right, Matt, go for it.
Yeah, I was just going to respond specifically to that comment in that within the comprehensive plan and also in the policy mapping process, we are working with the other departments within the city and the county to, one, identify impacts from the policy map, but also to start moving in a direction where the departments are using similar approaches and similar data sets to do forecasting of demand, to start to alleviate some of those issues in terms of plans not necessarily aligning between the different departments. So it's something that was recognized in the comp plan as there's efforts moving forward to address it.
All right.
One follow-up comment from Vernetta on the point that was, or the question that was just asked. She says, great point about other departments. The UDO should regulate all departments following the CBA needs and infrastructure needs.
Eric has a comment.
My question is, I guess, related to seeing the slide about future updates and seeing leveraging the bonus structure and the TOD for benefits in the future. Also mentioned using like an overlay to also implement them. So is the understanding that there wouldn't be any of this in this first version of the UDO, or is that still on the table for a future draft before it gets passed?
What we have to do in order to accomplish that is see if there's anything that can be added. A lot of what we're talking about is going to take some interagency coordination, and so we're just not going to be able to do that all and get it in a draft to get in front of council, get adopted in the time frame that we're working with. If there is an opportunity that we can address that, then we will definitely, we're talking with that team. And so we'll continue to see if there's opportunity. But if not, it doesn't mean it's off the table. It means that we're going to see if we can work it in either another way or in a future iteration. I don't know if that answers.
But there's a possibility that this could go through without
Well, I think that's part of why we wanted to go over in the tools section, and we had that table, even though the table doesn't talk about the nuance with the draft UDO and how it's applied. There are some things that we've talked about that will be addressed already in what we have out there in the draft UDO. If there's some more things, like I said, that's related and it isn't too much of a lift, then maybe we can look into that. But I can't make any promises. All right, I think we're ready to move on. The next slide, our Jamboard that we're going to open up is, are there any specific programs that you think that the city or nonprofits or anybody could offer that would help you guys do your jobs and get benefits for you guys that we haven't discussed? Again, these are more programmatic as opposed to policies or regulations.
Hi, this is Fernetta. Can you please repeat the question that we're answering?
Sure. This Jamboard is for any ideas you have for programs based on what we've shared that you would like us to investigate or look into, any ideas on programmatic approaches to increasing community benefits as opposed to policy or regulation.
I'll put that in the chat too.
Thank you, Leanne. Sure, I was asked to repeat the question one more time. So what ideas do you have for programs that we can look into for the action plan? So these are programmatic things. I understand it's a little bit harder, but these are not necessarily the on the ground built benefits you want. These would be more programs that the city could create or monitor. These are programs that maybe a nonprofit could do or another entity. Again, this is, and I'll say it for some of the people in the room here, especially, these programs are not going to be things that developers do. Developers will develop land, they own the land, they will create a development there and move through it. The programmatic piece is really kind of everyone else, what we can do to support this. All right, so I've given you guys a couple minutes. I know you're still adding things. Please feel free to continue adding things. We have adding a pay in lieu program similar to the tree mitigation and affordable housing tools that could cover parks, road projects, bike, sidewalk, and other community benefits. That would create something that's a little bit more flexible. We have someone that supports that. I like the support that I'm feeling from you guys. Maintaining a community wish list and record of requests that keep bubbling up from and ongoing with community input. That's good, and that's one of those reasons we really want to make sure that the community groups are part of the planning process as we continue, especially with the community area planning process, any station area planning along transit lines, corridor of opportunity playbooks. It's really important that you guys get there because that will help create kind of a wish list of projects. Identifying and executing broad-based communications in different languages and methods to inform the community. I think that's a great idea. Something that will help developers know who is actually speaking on behalf of each community. And that's part of that contact list. And so when we actually get ready to implement that contact list, you know, certain members or staff members know certain people in different community groups and who to contact. But we need to really create a list that's public and that the city and the community groups can help maintain together so that we always have it updated. And that way a developer or landowner can look at that list and figure out who they need to contact. I think that would be really helpful. Define how different project types and scales provide benefits. Absolutely. John, I'm going to ask Gretchen to read your comment then out loud because it was cut off. We have one here in very big letters to slow down the UDO. Create a community benefits council in specific geography, like a city council district, comprised of council members, city staff, neighbors, developers, owners, business representatives, etc. So essentially kind of like this workshop, but on a geographic basis. That's what I'm hearing. City and tenant co-op program for acquisition of naturally occurring affordable housing properties, and also an ordinance for notice of intent to sell a NOAA property. And then there are a couple of others that are a little bit too small for me to read. Let's see, what happens when various members of a community disagree on the CBs they want, specifically affordable housing. That is something that we definitely need to look into. It's something that we've talked about internally. So if you guys have any ideas on how to help us figure that out, we would be open to it. If not, we do have some people looking into that as well. Let's see, who defines community? Adjacent homeowner of a development or the broader HOA. Each currently have different voices in the conditional rezoning process. And I think that relates to the one I just said before. What happens when the community doesn't agree? And how do we help the community come to some kind of consensus so that the development community knows how to interact and knows what they want? Let's see, a city department budget for building and maintaining small public parks, urban trails, or small connections under a certain size and letting the county run the larger ones. I think we heard that at the workshop as well, maybe not as clear, but I'm hearing that. I'm hearing it loud and clear what we're getting from there. So thank you for that. We did have one more question that was about specific projects. Do you guys, I just want to ask you guys if you feel the need to respond and give us a list of projects that you know about now, or ideas of projects, or do you want to move on? I'm asking because it's another Jamboard session and I don't know if you guys are struggling with coming up with ideas. So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. So we asked about policies, then we asked about programs. Now I want to ask you about projects, specific projects. If, however, you guys would rather move forward and come back to this, we can do that. Well, again, let's clarify. We're talking about community benefits, not a community benefit agreement necessarily. That's another tool. Who funds them? It depends. Yes. So HOAs do set aside money. Yep. I think part of the action plan is to talk about how to increase that capacity and how we can support increasing that capacity, to your point, because certain neighborhoods, let me paraphrase because you didn't have the microphone up there, but I just want to paraphrase and say certain communities that have capacity now, they volunteer a lot of time and they have resources, whereas the communities that don't, how are we going to help support them with either time or resources so that they can get there? Is that?
Many actually have funds for legal actions, and I mean, it's not an insignificant thing you're putting on communities to be able to support this sort of interaction.
Okay. And so part of then what the action plan needs to be is, let's talk about how do we increase community capacity and then what the needs are that the city can support, or nonprofits or what have you. Okay.
Should we add that as like a Jamboard item here, maybe financial resources to assist community organizations and engagement work? That generally capture it? Engagement / legal?
I think so. Thank you. Okay. With that, we're going to add that on. We are going to capture and save these Jamboard, all the sticky notes, so we have it. Let me go ahead. I'm going to share my screen again. Go back to our presentation. So we're going to get into case studies. Before I turn it over to Matt, I just want to mention we had someone speak to us about a community benefit agreement as a case study with the Paces Foundation and the West Neighborhood Coalition in September. So we had that, and that's a really good case study we have in Charlotte. Something else that just recently happened. Atrium is donating 14 acres of land to affordable housing. Part of that will include a food co-op. And so that's an example of how some of these community benefits come about and the government authority isn't involved in any way, shape, or form. They come up with this, the developers, the communities, they can come up with the project, you guys can come up with projects without having to go through the government. And so we encourage that as well. And that's a lot of why we want you guys to start talking, because some of this stuff can happen outside of the regulatory process itself. That's just another, again, really recent and relevant local example. What we've asked Matt to do specifically is look for case studies of things that Charlotte isn't currently doing or things that we're not seeing in the city that we can use as examples to help us investigate things. And so with that, Matt, I'll turn it over to you and you just let me know when you want me to progress through your slides.
Sure. Thanks, Robin. So we are investigating case studies to help support the action plan. Really, it's just bringing ideas from communities outside of Charlotte that might be sparking an idea in the community, might be a model to consider, or just something to review as we as a community build to look to create a more full toolbox for providing community benefits. And so as we've looked at these different case studies, we've sort of organized them in 3 general groups. Looking at sort of catalytic project agreements, so larger projects that have involved either community benefit agreements or the provision of community benefits as part of that project. That's a more typical way that that true community benefit agreement is applied. We've also done a fair amount of research for this project, but and other projects we've worked on are related to incentive programs and public subsidies and how those programs are being modified in many communities to create opportunities for providing community benefits in addition to their objective of attracting a business or a development, certain type of development. And then lastly, we're looking at different ways that neighborhoods have organized themselves and tools they've used to do that, and then also tools and strategies they've used to actually start to fund and implement their own community benefits. And so the case studies are sort of in those 3 buckets. So looking at the next slide, it provides some examples of the tools that fall into those buckets. So in terms of catalytic project agreements, we see development agreements. That's something that's used in Charlotte currently, but perhaps some creative ways they've been used outside of Charlotte. True community benefit agreements, for a lot of times we've seen these for large catalytic projects like new soccer or football or baseball stadiums. And those, more often, these type of catalytic projects aren't things that occur every year. They maybe occur once every 10, 20 years. And so there's an opportunity there, but it's not necessarily a programmatic approach that would create benefits ongoing for the community. And so a lot of our research has been kind of looking at those other buckets as well. And then there are examples of actual development regulations or ordinances that include community benefit agreements or the provision of community benefits. In terms of public subsidies and incentives, we're seeing some movement in a lot of communities related to the redirection or modification of economic development incentives, specifically tax incentives, as a way to address inclusive growth and equity and community benefits. We see a lot of creative uses of tax increment grants and financing to create community benefits. That's a growing area as well. And then an idea that's been mentioned previously, this idea of fees in lieu for incentives. So can we pay a fee for an incentive or a development entitlement, and that fee can be used to create a community benefit? And then the last bucket is related to that neighborhood organization. And so we have looked at examples around how communities have been provided or created their own resources for organization, ideas around community trusts and land trusts. There's even neighborhoods that have started to create their own improvement districts or investment funds to build projects. And then lastly, some really creative ideas around actual community equity and how residents of neighborhoods can actually have an equity stake in projects and the ownership of property within their communities. And those are really some interesting and sort of emerging ideas in different communities throughout the US. So the next slide lists a few of the case studies that we've looked into already. And there's more we'll probably add, and we'd love to hear some input from you all about examples or types of projects you'd like us to perhaps explore. I mentioned, a lot of the catalytic project agreements are often around the ideas of baseball, basketball stadiums. We do profile Detroit's community benefit ordinance. That is an actual program for community benefits, but it is related to projects that are of a certain threshold. They have to be $75 million in size or greater, and also incorporate some sort of public investment or subsidy. And so there often needs to be some sort of lever that enacts community benefit. In terms of public subsidies and incentives, Houston has a new tax abate incentive program that requires community benefits to be included in projects to be able to receive that incentive. We've seen a couple different examples or several examples around the use of tax increments. One in Atlanta around the Beltline, projects that use tax increment dollars have to provide community benefit, and even capital projects that are funded through tax increment have to include community benefits. So public and private sector participating there. We're working currently with Denver and their Urban Renewal Authority and creating a strategic plan. And one of the ideas coming out of there is a community investment fund. And actually, tax increment dollars that are in excess of the debt obligations that were used for bonding or project-specific investments are going to be pooled into a community investment fund that can be used to fund small-scale projects throughout the city and not specifically tied to urban renewal projects. Now, there are a lot of legal considerations are required for a lot of those different programs, and those are varied by state and even cities. So that's something we'll need to consider, but there are creative ways to use those funds. Another example is in Chicago, where a density bonus is provided for development in the center city. And to get that density bonus, you have to pay a fee in lieu. And if that fee is used to fund a neighborhood investment fund for improvements in neighborhoods that are not in the center city, they're actually the disadvantaged and underinvested neighborhoods in the community. And so a way to redirect tax dollars and even fee in lieu dollars into areas that are underserved. And then the really interesting group, I think, is this neighborhood organization group. And so we have some examples about actual toolkits similar to what we're building here that provide resources to neighborhoods for how they can engage in the development process and how they can engage with the city and the private sector in obtaining community benefits. There's actually examples where cities and community trusts are funding neighborhood organizations to organize themselves. So seed funding for neighborhoods to create their own organization and actually get sort of organized and set up to where they can advocate properly for themselves and perhaps start to implement programs. We've seen neighborhoods in Milwaukee as a great example of neighborhood investment funds where neighborhoods are taxing themselves to create projects. One neighborhood there charges $50 a year for each home. And that pool of funds is used to pay for roof repairs and small home improvement projects in the community. So it can be really small scale stuff. And the last example are these community equity initiatives. So some examples in LA, Minneapolis, and Portland, and Boston, where residents of a neighborhood or even the city are able to contribute, anywhere from $50 to $5,000 into different vehicles to allow them to be an equity shareholder of a project. So in LA specifically, they're buying commercial strip centers and occupying those with local businesses, and the returns from those investments are going back to these community members that invested their equity into the project. So some really exciting examples that don't even involve the city, and that we'll be profiling those in the strategy as well. So with that, I'm wondering if there are any questions or ideas you think we might try to explore, or comments to what you've heard as we kind of continue to build out this toolbox and the action strategy.
Comment, John.
Why are you
Do you want to?
using Zoom
Do you want to
instead
just?
We're gonna let John say his own comment.
I love the idea you had around the last, I think it was community, where when you substitute, I was talking with Sam Smith at the break, when you substitute the word developer, which has a somewhat negative connotation, with owner or resident or business, and say, how can you build equity from the inside out in your community? And the idea of everybody contributing $50 for some sort of fund, or those residents being organized, and there being city programs that teach them how to build equity, and then there's a matching grant that doubles or trebles what they contribute, and then they determine what's built within their community and how. That to me is a fascinating idea, because it gives the power back to the community and leverages efforts. And again, that's where you bubble up the tax revenue, and that tax revenue funds that. That's where, you know, yeah, that idea to me is a fantastic idea, Matt. Love that.
All right, Tim.
I'll jump on one, Matt, that equity concept you were talking about with community members or organizations investing in deals assumes that all deals go up. Some deals go down. And so how do you deal with that? You know, if there are losses in a situation like that, just a thought. I mean, again, the assumption is that there's runaway profits here, and that's not the case universally, certainly.
Yeah, I mean, that's something to consider, and we can highlight in the various examples how they mitigate risks. Some of them are more like REITs or investment trusts, and so there's more of a diversified portfolio that their equity investment goes into, to where you can mitigate losses on one specific project versus one that's perhaps more successful. But that's something that we should highlight and realize there are downsides. Not all development projects make money, as you're aware. So there is risk involved, and we can try to identify how those are perhaps mitigated for these community members, as that's not necessarily the thing that we want to encourage, is risky investment from neighborhoods. So that's a great point.
We have Nate in the room, but Ralphine raised her hand online. Let's get her comment and then we'll head to you, Nate.
Hi, everyone. Ralphine with LISC. I definitely like thank you, Matt, for that and for all of that information. Definitely like the fact that you've researched a lot of different projects. LISC has been involved with a lot of those projects that you have listed there. But one of the things that was just already said that took what I was going to say was that being able to really focus on the pros and the cons, because, you know, there are cons to it and there are pros to it. And I think the more that we look at different examples across the country, the more that we can educate everyone, and particularly the community, on what it means to have a community benefit agreement and how they can go about doing that. And what does it entail, particularly with everyone. So I totally agree with the way that you're doing it and what you presented there. And just, I think for us, it's making sure, because this is a topic of conversation in Charlotte, but right now, from a LISC perspective, it's a topic of conversation across the country. Philadelphia is looking at this right now. Our Boston office is looking at this right now. So this is not just Charlotte, this is across the country. So I think that we can learn from what's already been done and not try to reinvent any wheels, so that way we can make sure that we don't go into anything lightly, but also don't go into anything that we don't already know what the result is going to be.
Absolutely, Ralphine. Thank you for that.
Yeah, a lot of the ideas are really exciting. Before we dive too deep in, I'd love to understand statutorily in North Carolina, which ones of these are actually options for us in the city of Charlotte.
Yeah, and Matt, you can jump in here too. What we're going to do, or what the idea was to get as many case studies as we can. Obviously, we can't duplicate it one for one in Charlotte because we have different state enabling legislation. And so it's, what ideas do we like? Which ones do we think could work? And then how do we tweak it if it's just a tweak, or how do we make the outcome work or the premise work in North Carolina with what we have?
Yeah, our goal is to provide some insight into challenges to implementation for various tools, to identify, you know, how they may not work, but also how, you know, what changes might be necessary to make them a reality, even if they're large changes. And not to say that we're going to advocate for those, you know, very hard changes that may not be possible, but just so that we understand that, you know, there are ways to make it work, and whether there's enough support or desire to make those changes is sort of what grows out of that. And so I think it's important to note the regulatory constraints, but not be limited by them.
Thank you. We have Ricky, who also has a question in here.
Matt, I like some of the examples that you've listed. I just wanted to make a comment in terms of some of the strategies, like the community investment trusts and things of that nature. When we look at this, I want us to keep in mind that not all communities are equal. And when we talk about those equity frameworks and or the implementation of some of these, it may be easier in one place, but certainly harder in others because from a demographic perspective. And so I just had a question for Matt. Had you looked at the Hill District model in Pittsburgh as well as one of those practices, particularly when we look at just meeting some of those basic needs kind of elements in a community that that goes away from the framework of extractive wealth and starts to build and create community wealth. That's the real challenge in this framework.
I haven't specifically that, but I'd love to research that and include it. So if you can add it to the chat or to the Jamboard or something, just so we have a good note of specifically your reference, that would be really helpful.
What was the name of that again?
The Hill District had various components of offsetting, displacement and things of that nature, and even provision of a support for a grocery store in that food desert area, as well as significant opportunity for economic mobility framework within that CVA model. So that's without going into and getting down in the weeds. That's about what I can tell you about it.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks. I have that note now, and we can dig in.
Thank you. Are there any other comments online? Okay, I'm going to run through. We're about 10 minutes over, so I'm just going to jump right into the next steps if we can. If you guys need to take a break, feel free to do so. Let me get back in here. So the next steps, we have 2 questions we want to ask you guys to help us build this out. The first one is that LISC, you heard Ralphine speaking just a minute ago. LISC has agreed to take over a speaker series. This is something that we talked about in our action plan, but LISC is ready to mobilize that and start putting that into action. And so one of the things we had at the workshop on our exit interview was what kind of topics did you guys want to hear about? And so we have some, they're listed up here, community benefit agreements, increasing community leadership capacity, engaging in a rezoning process, engaging in future planning initiatives. What specific topics, we can jump back to Jamboard now. If you guys have topics that you would like to learn about, whether it's the development process, whether it's really anything you can think of that relate to community benefits, let's go ahead and put those up. We're going to catalog those and make sure LISC has those. And they will also get your contact information so that when they create the speaker series, you guys will all get access to that. I love when you guys all log into Jamboard and I can see all these animal pictures pop up. Looks like there's a camel. I don't know if that's flattering or not, but someone's a camel. All right, the first one we have up is a development 101. Something we were thinking. I know during the workshop, we went over kind of the development processes at a high level, but having something more specific where we just talk about one development process at a time. We'll probably have to do that after the UDO gets adopted too, right? I'll give you guys a couple more minutes to get some more thoughts up here. I know we're struggling. It's toward the end. We've been talking a lot, but we want to get you guys exactly what you need. So we have another suggestion, land use and design impacts on quality of life. That one I can't read. Gretchen, you're gonna have to make it bigger. It looks like it was cut off too, so I'll read it and then whoever wrote it, feel free to embellish. Cities that have implemented the ideas discussed for at least 3 and can share lessons learned. So it sounds like for that, bringing someone who has actually implemented one of our ideas or topics, have them come in and kind of talk about the process and how they work through it. Traffic and transportation planning. We got some folks. Oh, now they're piling on. All right, mitigation of unintended consequences. That one's tough, guys. We do the best we can in a lot of cases, but I think it's definitely worthy of a conversation, yes. Planners and the UDO consultants attend the Developer 101 workshop. We're gonna say they're gonna be there to be the experts that present the information. Who wants seed money again for projects? Good urban design principles like walkability and designing for people and not cars. That's a good one. Invite Elevated Chicago and other organizations doing great work in the space. I like that as well. Yeah, we have a speaker on neighborhood organizations like the Hill District, Ricky spoke about. Various overlay districts and how they can be used for community benefits. So like a pet overlay, historic district overlay, I think the neighborhood conservation overlay. Sure. I have a comment from the peanut gallery.
Just call me the peanut. The organization thing, like we sat down with Braxton, there's a few developers, Peter Pappas sort of came up with the idea, but sat down with Braxton and Renee, and we're talking specifically about Sugar Creek Road and 85 and the issues there. And not the development community, but the community, capital C community, came up with the Housing Impact Fund, which is a private organization that goes and builds affordable housing, and it went out and tried to raise 30 million bucks. Well, the fund raised $38 million and they had to cut it off. If this community can identify important projects like that, and specifically Sugar Creek Road has all those hotels, drug problems, shootings, like if we can figure out how to fix that, I think everybody in this community is ready to solve that problem. Just like, you know, the banks have put a lot of money towards affordable housing, the city put a lot of money. This is $38 million. The money is there if we can prioritize what are the big rocks and what does that small geographic area of Sugar Creek say they need and want. This community has the will to do it. So I just want to throw that out there. And the Hill District, if there's examples like that, let's go do them. And we've done it with the Housing Impact Fund.
Thank you for that. I think that's great. That again talks about, you know, there's a difference in these citywide or even the bigger issues that we want to tackle versus maybe some of the smaller ones that we can do in other ways. But yeah. All right, let's see. Did we get any more? ULI doing an urban plan for this group. So that's their kind of academy, for lack of a better term, for high school and early college. But maybe we could do it and redo it a bit, tweak it for the city. That we'd have to talk to them about that because we also have a planning academy within the city and maybe we can work together and tell both sides of it. All right, at this point, I'm gonna head over to our next question. Instead of going back to the presentation, if you just wanna open up the next Jamboard slide. The next thing we really heard, and it's an overarching theme in all of this, and that is how do we help you guys build your relationships between the development community, the city, and the neighborhood organizations? Or even if you're not in an organization, if you're a neighbor who's just concerned in your area, who do you start talking to? In a non-COVID world, this whole process would have been a little bit different. Our first workshop was in person. And we had to keep the number relatively small because of COVID protocols and things like that. This meeting is hybrid, so we have some people in the room and we have some people online virtually. But we really want to get your thoughts on how do we network? How would networking work better for you guys? And we have, again, we have neighborhood representatives, we have development company representatives, property owners, the civil engineering folks are represented as well. So what kind of networking events should we be looking at to help support relationship building for you guys? We had the idea of like virtual brown bag meet and greets where we highlight a person or an organization and then people can sign up and do a virtual meeting. But I really want to hear what kind of formats work better for you guys. So please let us know what kind of networking events you guys might like or be able to do. Some things not everyone can do. So we're open to all of those as well to help, again, foster that relationship.
Robin, while you were speaking, we had one comment come in from John Porter, and I think this relates to the last question that you asked, but he said ULI has urban plan for municipal employees. Many times I'm sure it would work for a more broad group.
Okay, that's good to know. The ideas are just flowing at the moment. It's always hard when you're looking at a white screen to add things.
And the question here is about really format, right? The ways in which networking might happen.
Yes, and the way that people can contribute. You know, we all struggle with different things. A lot of people don't necessarily want to go out at night if they have families and kids and homework and everything like that. So maybe something that's virtual works better. Maybe something during the day. Maybe there's something else that we're not thinking about. Maybe it's having more of these types of forums or meetings, things like that. I am literally open to anything to investigate. Really want to make sure that we create these relationships. So town hall events that could be sponsored by City Council or LISC with proctored intentional small group sessions before and after the program. Use Nextdoor. Now, so let me ask a follow-up question. How could you use Nextdoor for networking? Would that be just messaging back and forth? For lost dogs, Nextdoor is great. Just yeah. Yeah, go ahead, Tim.
This touches on the idea, I think that was on the last slide, but it's kind of too long to type here, but early in the 2040 planning process, in the context of community benefits and community benefit agreements, was the whole food desert conversation. And I had some interesting conversations with folks and staff, and I think I learned through that process that the assumption was developers are using that as a specific example. Developers are choosing where to build grocery stores and also choosing where not to build grocery stores, which is absolutely not the case. The developers respond to the grocer's interest in specific locations, and we can't force a grocer to build where they don't want to go. And what I think that amplified is the whole education process. So I do think, having these developer summits or some developer 101, whatever, I think might be helpful. It would give developers an opportunity to get to know the community members, and it would get community members to understand more about the pros and cons and the economics of development. So I just wanted to amplify that point.
Yeah. And so taking that, I think then networking events, not just based on who is there, but on topics would be a good idea too. Developer ask me anything drop-ins or Zoom sessions. Keeping a hybrid approach is good so that more people can utilize that. Going into the community itself and sharing information. So having community meetings in community meetings that already happen. So the different HOAs or community group meetings, have the development community pop into some of those, introduce yourself. Community and developer sponsored monthly breakfast forums. I am all for some eggs and bacon. Lunch and learn events, again, hybrid or otherwise, but that goes along with it. Speaker series. Hybrid works really well to ensure you don't miss it if you can't get there. And I'll just be honest and transparent about this. From where I sat, trying to create this in a hybrid format did cause me a little bit of pause. Like, how are we going to make sure that people are interacting and meeting each other and talking if some people are online and some people are in the room? That's why we decided to use Jamboard and see how it worked. And I think it worked really well with getting everybody kind of an equal footing. So it's not just everybody in the room talking and everyone online kind of sitting in the back and listening. So I think that worked out really well. But we'll continue to investigate how to keep utilizing hybrid and create a more equal conversation.
Robin, we have a hand up.
Sure.
Online. Sharp. If you can go ahead and unmute yourself.
Yeah, hi, this is Mike Sullivan. I'm the one that put in there about next door. And yes, you can find your dog. My dog got out once and was back home before I even realized it was out. A neighbor had found him. But I know that in Charlotte East, and I've mentioned this to Tim and some other folks, a lot of times you can sort of see where the conversation is going. And you can, for example, we saw that on the Silver Line discussion we did on the coal properties, which is on Central Avenue, the East Lamar site, the 2040 plan. And we found what was very interesting is you can sort of track it geographically for the different concerns that different neighbors might have. And if I don't know if it would actually be helpful as far as getting information out, maybe a forum would, but I think you can see the direction that the conversation is going. And I think that it's a tool that perhaps other folks use for various ways. And I'm always surprised the city hasn't sort of caught on to that. But I think it's a great way of bringing neighbors together. It gets a tremendous conversation going long before a forum could even be organized.
Thank you for that. I don't know, the property owners in the room, do you guys utilize Nextdoor when you have a development or project in an area? I don't know. Being a person who works as a public servant, I've heard many things on Nextdoor. So I have monitored it myself, but especially in smaller communities. And I think the city has the capability to publicize certain things on Nextdoor. So we utilize it for that. But yeah, it could be a tool that we leverage in a new way. Sure. One more comment, and then I am going to wrap up because we are pretty much at 4:30.
Sure, it would just be a quick one.
Yeah, go ahead.
That last one was just to be aware that, yes, you could see where things are going, but just like Twitter and other social media, that doesn't truly represent everybody in the community. It probably is the loudest in the most extreme views. are possibly there. Not that that's always the case, but we want to be careful not to only go by that. But it is,
Fair.
yeah.
That touches to one of those points that we made earlier, right? How do you know which community member to listen to? It's a pretty big deal, which is why hopefully we can help neighborhoods organize and prioritize different projects. We also had a chat come through. So Laura Harmon with our entitlement group did say that rezonings, I believe, are publicized on Nextdoor as well. So we do utilize that for publications if nothing else. To end, instead of going back to my presentation, because it's just one slide, I just want to go over the next steps. So over the winter period, what we're going to do, my team that's been working on this, we're going to really refine this community benefits toolbox and action plan based on what we heard today. So thank you guys so much for your feedback online and here in the room. We are going to refine that. We have told council that we will be presenting this information to council committee, planning committee, and eventually to council as well to seek further guidance on how we're going to progress with this process. We will give you guys an update. We're going to look to do that in spring. It sounds like a long time, but again, a lot of the ideas that we shared today, it's going to take a lot of coordination to get those moving forward. And we don't want to just keep having meetings every month to tell you the same thing. So we're going to take kind of a break, focus in, really refine this body of work, and get some more legs underneath of it, and then report back to you guys. So look for that in spring 2022. Gosh, it sounds so weird to say that. Oh, but thank you guys for being here. Again, we will have slides and a summary up on our website, and we'll send that link out to you guys shortly. Thank you.